You're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of March 31st, 2025. A tremendous number of events have occurred today, so let's get started. If we summarize all the news that has come in today from the entire line of contact, we can conclude that the Russian army is currently on the offensive along almost the entire front line. The armed forces of Ukraine are counterattacking or attacking only in a few sectors: the Pokrovsk direction, the Chasiv Yar direction, and the Belgorod region. Well then, let's proceed in order, and we'll start with the Zaporizhzhia direction. Today, various sources report that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have expanded their zone of control and advanced on a broad front toward the settlement of Novopavlivka. This information was published by neutral cartographers, and we assume that the Russian army plans to continue its advance toward this settlement. Let me remind you that since early March, the Russian army has been actively advancing along the line of settlements such as Lobkovaya. Further attacks were directed toward Piatikatki and Stepovaya, and in recent days, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported the clearing of settlements like Malye Shcherbaki and Shcherbaki. Essentially, after strikes in this direction, the Russian army has secured its flanks, and now Russian units can safely advance toward Novopavlivka, which in turn is practically a suburb of the settlement of Orikhiv. As we can see, the strike is being delivered between two flanks, between Malye Shcherbaki, and the settlement of Nestoryanka. Well, we'll see how the situation develops further. But if the Russian army does manage to enter and consolidate its position in Novopavlivka, this will mark the beginning of combat operations for Orikhiv itself, and it appears that this is precisely the direction in which the Russian armed forces plan to move. Next, we move to the Bogdanivka direction, from which a large number of reports are also coming in. The most important and interesting news comes from the triangle of Rozlyv, Konstantinopol, and Bogdanivka. This is where the greatest number of geolocations are concentrated, and this is where the fiercest fighting is taking place. We'll start with the settlement of Rozlyv, whose map changes every day, and the adjustments are quite interesting and significant. Let me remind you that the offensive operation in this sector began around March 26th to 27th, and by the end of March 27th, the first pro-Russian sources published information that during combat operations, the Russian army managed to enter Rozlyv from the east and gain a foothold on its eastern outskirts. A little later, on March 28th, this information was also confirmed by pro-Russian sources, though again without any geolocations, videos, or possible confirmation from Ukrainian sources. The first posts and information from pro-Ukrainian cartographers only came by the end of March 29th. Moreover, the adjustments on the map by pro-Ukrainian cartographers raise a great many questions. If you look at the adjustments from a pro-Ukrainian mapping service, they show that the Russian army allegedly broke through the defenses east of Rozlyv during the offensive, possibly with a reconnaissance team slipping into the central part, and somewhere near small buildings in the very center, Russian units began consolidating. Essentially, this was a kind of resistance pocket. This strike undoubtedly breached the AFU's defenses. Overall, the entire defensive line in this sector collapsed between March 29th and 30th. The armed forces of Ukraine conducted counterattacks to restore positions and regain control over the central part of Rozlyv. However, based on the information we received from this direction over the past day, we concluded that Ukrainian units failed to dislodge Russian forces from the center of the settlement. Moreover, while Russian paratroopers held the center of Rozlyv, the main army gradually pushed back into the eastern outskirts. By the end of March 30th, reports came in that the Russian armed forces had firmly and densely entrenched themselves in the eastern part of Rozlyv and continued their advance. And today, by the end of March 31st, the settlement had completely come under Russian control. We received this information just before recording this video, and confirmation footage appeared online. This is corroborated by both reliable pro-Russian sources and objective control footage. Ukrainian sources, however, continue to insist that control over Rozlyv is sporadic. Here's another adjustment from pro-Ukrainian sources by the end of March 31st. In addition to the consolidation and a safety island, so to speak, in the center of the village, 4 more pockets appeared. 2 in the northwestern part, 1 in the northeastern part, and 1 in the southern part. That is, Ukrainian sources claim that while Russian units are present in the village, they only control certain strongpoints and are trying to coordinate among themselves while the main army slowly advances toward the village. This is also supported by various neutral cartographers. Today, separate Russian units began moving toward Rozlyv from the south as well. After the settlement of Rozlyv, the Ukrainian armed forces, which are still, or were, in Constantinople, automatically find themselves encircled. Then, closer to the evening of March 31st, further adjustments came from pro-Russian sources, based on which we can conclude that the Russian army has completely cleared Constantinople and has approached the settlement of Bogdanivka. Essentially, the Rozlyv-Constantinople direction is already fully concluded. The Russian army is gradually regrouping for a further advance toward Bogdanivka. Next, we move to the Novopavlivka direction, where very interesting objective control footage and frontline adjustments continue to come in. Let me remind you that on this sector of the front, on the 27th, the Russian armed forces launched a large-scale offensive aimed at finally breaking through Ukrainian defenses. On the 27th, the first footage and various vague reports from pro-Russian sources began appearing, stating that during combat operations, Russian units had managed to at least enter the southern part of the settlement, Bogdanivka, located southwest of Zaporizhzhia. There were also reports of a reduction or clearing of the pocket between Yasenev and the settlement of Andriivka. These were, so to speak, the first sprouts, the initial leaks of information about what was happening in this sector. By the 28th, additional materials and confirmations from various fairly reliable sources emerged, confirming that this operation had indeed taken place. Closer to March 29th, new objective control footage appeared, showing a significant breakthrough by Russian units toward the border of the Donetsk region. A video was published by Ukrainian sources showing several episodes from this large-scale offensive in which the Russian Federation used an enormous amount of equipment and personnel. Based on this footage and several geolocations identified while analyzing the video, the first frontline adjustments were made. Russian units managed to reach and bypass Kotlyaryvka from the southwest. They also secured positions in the southeastern part of Bogdanivka. By the end of March 30th, additional geolocations from the same videos further refined the map. Most of the adjustments were concentrated around the settlement of Preobrazhenka. Based on the footage published by the Ukrainian side, it became clear and obvious that during this offensive, the Russian armed forces had also managed to enter Preobrazhenka from both the west and the east. Effectively, the settlement had likely come under full Russian control. Most likely, by the end of March 30th, there was still some sporadic resistance in Preobrazhenka, strong points surrounded by Russian units. But by the 31st, it became clear that Preobrazhenka was already behind them. It's possible that Russian army units are still mopping up the area, but the first reports and publications have already begun appearing, stating that Russian forces advanced beyond Preobrazhenka toward Toretsk and have already entered the eastern part of this settlement. Let me remind you, these are the last two villages in this part of the Donetsk region before the Dnipropetrovsk region. Now let's move slightly north toward the settlement of Pokrovsk, where the situation is developing differently. Here it is exclusively Ukrainian units that are counterattacking and attacking. The Russian army, it seems, has gone into a deep static defense to hold this pocket and buy time while Russian units gradually push into Novopavlivka. Well, let's proceed in order. Today, a large number of markers, publications, and insider reports from pro-Russian, neutral, and pro-Ukrainian sources have come in. There is some footage, but no definitive information regarding combat operations in this pocket has been published yet, so this must also be taken into account. We'll start with Uspanivka. Just yesterday, on March 30th, footage and frontline adjustments from various mapping services appeared, indicating that the situation in Uspanivka was developing very successfully for Russian units. Russian forces had completely cleared Uspanivka. Objective control footage was published confirming their presence on the western outskirts. Some pro-Russian sources noted further advances and even consolidation on the eastern outskirts of Novoalexandrivka. However, later, by the end of March 30th and into the morning of March 31st, reports emerged that Ukrainian units had counterattacked in Uspenivka, and during this counterstrike, managed to re-enter the southern part of the settlement. Now, we see that while this information hasn't been confirmed by any geolocations, it's possible that at that moment a situation arose where some Russian units in the western and northwestern parts were once again cut off from Novopavlivka. By the end of the 31st, the situation may have changed again. Additionally, some neutral cartographers adjusted their maps today based on the data available to them. As a result of Ukrainian counterattacks, they managed to fully clear the settlement of Udachne, as well as the fields between Udachne and the settlement of Solone. Let's see how the map was adjusted. This is how it looked by the end of March 30th. Some neutral cartographers, by the end of March 31st, repainted part of the fields in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces. For now, we're marking this territory as contested until we receive additional confirmation. A similar situation is unfolding near the settlement of Kotlin, where fierce fighting continues between Russian units and elements of Ukraine's 25th Brigade. Today, many different posts were published, and honestly, there's even a growing conflict between various OSINTers and cartographers regarding Kotlin. The issue is that this settlement may have changed hands multiple times in a single day between Russian and Ukrainian forces. Most of the village has likely already been destroyed. This morning, some neutral cartographers noted that during a counterattack, Ukrainian units managed to fully regain control of Kotlin, cross the railway, and consolidate in the southern part of the village. This information came in early today. Based on this data, we've updated our map. This is how the map looked yesterday, on March 30th. For example, on March 29th, there was footage from the central part. These shots likely show strikes on Russian army positions in the southwestern part of Kotlin, just before another Ukrainian counterattack. Later, reports emerged about a Ukrainian counterattack that may have partially restored their control over the village. Then, by the end of March 31st, objective control footage was published, showing 2 Russian assault aircraft entering the southwestern sector, where they came under FPV drone fire. This clearly indicates that neither Ukrainian nor Russian forces currently have firm control over Kotlin. Fierce fighting continues, aligning with the pattern we've discussed repeatedly. Ukrainian units are prioritizing the elimination of the Kotlin-Udachne salient. This appears to be their current focus. Throughout the day, we also received geolocated footage from the Pishchane area. The footage shows Ukrainian armored vehicles, troop landings, and equipment movements, numerous episodes that have been partially geolocated on maps. These all indicate attacks have been launched from western, eastern, and northern flanks over the past 24 hours. Minor adjustments were made regarding the northern and western flanks, while the eastern flank showed no changes, though geolocations appeared right along the contact line. More information may emerge from this area soon. Overall, we can see the Ukrainian army is intensely focused on reducing this salient. It's an extremely difficult defensive position for Russian forces. The salient's primary purpose, I'll reiterate, is to buy time for the Novopavlivka offensive. The Russian army's main objective now is to cut the supply line along the railway toward Pokrovsk, exactly what this salient facilitates. However, given its proximity to Pokrovsk and vulnerability to sudden Ukrainian strikes, Russian command appears to have decided to push the front line and railway control slightly westward toward Novomoletsk and Udachne, possibly even toward Medjove. This would allow Russian forces to maintain distance from Pokrovsk and prevent further Ukrainian surprises. But achieving this requires advancing toward Novopavlivka. Next, we move to the Konstantinovka sector, which is also generating significant news. Today, some pro-Ukrainian sources began sounding alarms about a potential collapse near Tarasivka. Intense fighting has raged here since early this year, with Russian forces assaulting the small village of Tarasivka using drones and artillery. While Ukrainians still control at least the northern part, today's reports suggest their defensive line might break, potentially allowing Russian advances northward and flanking strikes toward Alexandropol and further to Zaria. Major combat is also unfolding near Sukha-Balka and Valentinovka. Recall that recently the Russian Defense Ministry reported completing the clearing of Panteleimonovka on March 29th, though the announcement came on the 30th. By March 31st, maps were being updated again, with Russian advances near Valentinovka and Balka, now confirmed even by pro-Ukrainian cartographers. According to their data, Russian units entered Valentinovka, possibly yesterday but confirmed today. With ongoing assaults on the Valentinovka-Suka-Balka axis, the clearing of Alexandropol continues, where Ukrainian units are fully encircled after the Panteleimonovka breakthrough. We're seeing the defenses gradually cracking here, with some sections possibly already collapsing. In Toretsk, fighting continues on the outskirts. Objective control footage confirms Russian presence on northern, southern and western edges. While most of Toretsk's perimeter is under Russian control, resistance persists, particularly in the Zabalka district. At Chasiv Yar, as mentioned earlier, this is the second sector where Ukrainian forces are actively counterattacking. Today, units of Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade launched another counterstrike, likely aiming to relieve their troops trapped near the Central Market and high-rise district. For months, Russian forces have been gradually encircling this area, recently completing the pincer movement. Ukrainian counterattacks to break through have so far failed, with heavy losses. These attacks reveal a new tactical group, marked by square and arrow symbols, operating in this sector, while Russian forces remain defensive, repelling assaults from Ukraine's 4th Brigade. On the Lyman front, Russian forces continue advancing toward the Oskil River. Pro-Ukrainian cartographers made significant updates near Novaya and Lipova, showing more strongpoints falling under Russian control. Russian troops are regrouping to bypass Kateryivka and Novaya itself, with assault operations likely imminent. In the Kupiansk sector, Russian advances continue toward encircling Kupiansk and its agglomeration, while simultaneously pushing toward Vovchansk. Offensive operations here began around March 27th to 28th, with rapid progress. March 30th reports indicated Russian units reached Kondrashivka's northern outskirts, followed by March 31st updates about expanded control and logistical preparations for a decisive assault. Northward, Russian movements from the Oskil River toward forested areas and Kutkivka suggest simultaneous expansion and consolidation of the bridgehead. The Belgorod sector also produced important news. While Russian sources claim complete control over Demidovka and other border villages, March 31st footage showed artillery strikes on Ukrainian positions in Demidovka, possibly archival or from earlier combat. This suggests Ukrainian forces, however tenuously, still maintain some presence. On the Sumy axis, Russian offensive tempo has slowed, with reduced activity. The day's main development was near Basivka, where increasing evidence confirms Russian forces are completing clearing operations. While Ukrainian presence persists in Oleshnya, Gwevka and Gornal, activity there remains low intensity. That's all for today, friends. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and all the best to you.